Hey guys, in today's video I'm super excited to present a very interesting and instructive Scrabble endgame that took place in a recent online game between longtime top expert Jerry Lerman and three-time North American Scrabble champion Joe Edley. Both of these guys, who are longtime good friends, have been at the top of the Scrabble scene for over 40 years, so you can imagine they've seen quite a lot when it comes to crazy positions and endgames. So the fact that I was asked to analyze this position should be an indicator of just how crazy it truly was. Here's the first key position of this endgame pictured on the screen right now. It's Jerry's turn. He has a narrow 2-point lead, 334 to 332, and he's holding a rack of ACIQSTZ. So Jerry with two of the four high-scoring power tiles in the game on his rack right now, the Q and the Z. Joe has a third, the X, on his rack. Joe, as you guys can see, and as Jerry knows from tile tracking, is holding 6 tiles, EFGISX. At this point, the bag is empty, no more tiles will be drawn, it is officially the endgame, and Jerry needs to find his best play in this position to give himself a chance to win this game. This position is unusually challenging because there are not one, not two, but 3 high-scoring tiles still yet to be played, which is pretty rare this late in a Scrabble game. And for Jerry in particular, whose turn it is, he's got 2 of these tiles, the Z and the notoriously inflexible Q. If Jerry isn't careful and is unable to play one of these tiles and gets stuck with it, then in many cases that is going to spell his doom, so he needs to be very precise in this position. And the Q in particular looks like it's going to be a big problem for Jerry, because while he does have 2 valid plays in this position that play off the Q, both of them have problems. One such play is Cots and Gins, and it's very easy to see the problem with this. It puts the Q directly above a triple word score, and Joe holds an I. Joe is going to respond with Fix, forming Chi and Axe, scoring a whopping 81 points and winning the game instantly. So Cots not a viable option for Jerry. Cheese with Gins doesn't give Joe quite as high scoring a response, but it's not too hard to see that Joe is going to still win easily after playing Gif, making Chi and If for 37. Joe is going to have ESX remaining on his rack, and he'll be able to play Sex either with News on the bottom right or with Sell on the top left. Jerry won't be able to block both and can't really do much with his Z, so Joe is going to win this game easily, as I'll leave you guys to confirm. So Jerry cannot play his Q on this turn. But then you might be wondering, if Jerry doesn't play his Q now, then can't Joe just block the spot-hooking Gins on his next turn, stick Jerry with the Q, and win this game easily? Well, it's not so simple, because in this position, Jerry finds a great resource. He doesn't play his Q, but he plays his Z, and not only does he play his Z, he sets himself up for another high-scoring play on his next turn. He plays Tiz with Newt for 31 points. And at first, this play doesn't look good, because Jerry gets rid of both his I, which he would need to play Cheese, and his T, which he would need to play Cots. So he leaves himself nowhere to play his Q on his next turn, so he is conceding himself to being Q-stuck. And with Joe still having 6 tiles, including the high-scoring X, it would seem that he would be able to slow play this position, accumulating enough points, coupled with the 20 points he's eventually going to get from catching Jerry with the unplayed Q, and Joe should be able to win this game easily. But, like I said, it's not so simple. In large part because, in addition to scoring well with the 31-point Tiz on this turn, Jerry now threatens to score another 33 on his next turn with Za in the bottom right corner, dropping his A, and if Jerry can get Za down, then he might be able to build his lead by a large enough margin to withstand a Q-stick from Joe. And the great thing about Za is it's super tricky for Joe to block. He actually only has one legal play that stops Jerry from playing Za, and Joe makes it. He plays Is for just 2 points from the I in Tiz. While this play does seem like a little bit of a waste of Joe's S because he's only getting 2 points for it, the benefit he reaps from blocking the Za spot is huge, because Za would score 33 points for Jerry. And as we'll see, the next best spot for Jerry's A scores more than 20 points fewer than he would get for Za. So a big sacrifice for Joe, but at least on the surface, it would seem that it's a warranted sacrifice. Let's see how this game progressed. Jerry responds to Joe's S-drop with an S-drop of his own, garnering 17 points, notably 15 more than the 2 Joe got for Is, with Ouse and Saw. Now you might be thinking, why would Jerry just play one tile here? Normally, in Scrabble endgames, you want to try to play as many tiles as you can to try to go out quickly and catch your opponent with unplayed tiles. However, that principle doesn't apply here because Jerry is Q-stuck. He can't play his Q now, and if Joe is careful, he won't ever be able to play his Q. So Jerry is never going to go out, and as such, it's actually in his best interest to slow play. Because remember, Joe also knows that Jerry is not going out, so Joe is going to take his own time slow playing his tiles to try to get as many points as he can. So with Joe in no rush to go out, Jerry should also be in no rush to play his tiles, and he should be playing off just a couple at a time along with Joe to at least accumulate as many points as he can himself. So this is a heads-up play by Jerry, not playing something like Sack over here for 20 and getting rid of all of his tiles at once. So Jerry with Alfs and Saw, and Joe now here is holding E, F, G, I, X. He is down by 48 points, and he appears to have only one winning play in this position. It's really clever and tough to see, so I'll let you guys pause the video and see if you're able to come up with the play that Joe made in this position. It appears that the most straightforward approach here for Joe, just playing off one tile at a time and trying to get as many points as possible that way, is going to fall a bit short. One such way he could try that is starting with X for 9 points in the bottom left. He can actually only get 9 points for his X in the original position, which is a bit disappointing for Joe. Jerry would respond to this play with Mick for 10, again just playing off one tile at a time as opposed to both his C and his A simultaneously. Joe might respond with Mig for 8 points, and Jerry has to be a little bit careful here. He does not want to play Ka and Agin for 11, that's his highest scoring A spot, because that would allow Joe to drop his F with Kaf and Fear for a lot of points. So instead, Jerry is better off sacrificing 2 points, playing Ta and Anu for 9, and forcing Joe to get less points for his F. His best play now would be Fem for just 8 points. Jerry with now just his Q has to pass, and Joe can now attack on his E, playing Fem and L for 13. This is of course better for Joe than playing Fem immediately, because now he gets the value of Fem twice. Once with Fem and once with Fem. But it's still not going to be enough, because after Jerry passes, Joe can only get 4 for his I with Li, and Joe will not quite catch Jerry. Jerry will hold on to win by 5, 401 to 396 in this line. So, going back to the position after Jerry plays Alfs and Saw, we now realize that Joe is going to need to find some other resource here to rack up enough points besides playing one tile at a time. And the most natural thing to think about here for Joe is to try to set up his X. Like I mentioned before, his X can only get him 9 points on this board if he plays it individually with X in the bottom left. That's not very much for an 8-point tile. So if there was a way here that Joe could set up a higher scoring spot for his X that's going to be difficult or ideally impossible for Jerry to block, that might be his path to victory. Now, there are several potential ways for Joe to set up his X in this position, but there is only one that wins, and it is the one that Joe found and played during the game. He drops his E for just 7 points with A, E, and E, with the idea of setting up Fe and Fix for 38 points on his next turn. And the beauty of this is Jerry is unable to block. With ACQ, there is no play he can make that blocks Joe's impending Fix for 38. However, is that going to really be enough? Let's see. After AE, then Jerry, with nothing better to do, drops his C with Mick, as we looked at in the previous line. And Joe needs to be careful here. He cannot play Fix immediately. Why can he not play Fix immediately? Because it gives Jerry a spot to play off his Q. If Jerry gets down Chi for 11 to the I and Fix, then Jerry is going to win easily, because now Joe is not going to get 20 bonus points for Jerry's unplayed Q after he goes out. So Joe needs to wait. He needs to play off his G first. Mig for 8 comes down for Joe, and now, and only now after Jerry plays off his A with Ka and Agin for 11, does Joe go out with Fix for 38. He can play Fix now because he goes out. The game ends, Jerry doesn't get a turn to play off his Q, and Joe gets to within 16. He gets 20 for Jerry's unplayed Q, and Joe ekes out a win by 4, 407 to 403. This is what actually happened during the game. What a crazy finish and a great find for Joe there with E. Again, I believe his only win in that position after Jerry dropped his S with Alfs and Saw. So now that we've gone through this analysis, we understand that Jerry's play of Alfs and Saw in response to Joe's play of is a losing play because it allows Joe's very crafty setup of AE and E. So that naturally begs the question, is there anything else Jerry could do in this position besides drop his S? And as the players correctly realized in their post-game analysis, the answer is yes. Jerry instead should have first dropped his C with Sell for 5 points. with the idea of preserving his S play for next turn, but most importantly, stopping Joe from playing AE, and thereby stopping him from getting down fix for 38 points. So if Jerry plays this, then how should Joe respond? When Joe initially sent me this endgame to analyze via email, his assumption was that in response to Jerry's blocking play of Cell, he should try to create a second X setup that might be difficult for Jerry to block now that he doesn't have his C. And there are several interesting ways for Joe to go about this, all of which are now in the top right corner of the board. One particularly promising one appears to be playing Gay for 7 points, setting up a massive outplay of Fix down the M column, making Gee an X, getting his X both ways on the double word score, scoring over 40 points and winning the game instantly. So this forces Jerry to block. However, Jerry can block, and he can block most effectively with Ta and Ag for 5 points. This not only stops Joe's play of Fix, but amazingly, it eye-sticks Joe. After this play, Joe holding FIX has nowhere on this board to play his I, either individually or along with one or both of his other tiles. So Joe in this position is going to be best served just dropping his X with X for 18 points. Jerry will respond with Aufs and Saw now that Joe has gotten rid of his X, and Joe again is unable to play his I, so all he can really do is get rid of his F. He plays Fem for 8 points, and now the problem for Joe is while Jerry is Q stuck, Joe is also I stuck. So what that means is because Joe doesn't play out, he's not going to get double the value for Jerry's unplayed Q. He's not going to get a 20-point bonus. Jerry is going to still lose single the value of his Q, 10 points for not being able to play it, but that is significantly worse for Joe, of course, than getting a full 20-point bonus. So when all is said and done, this game is going to end at 382 to 366 after a 6-pass, with Jerry winning fairly comfortably. Another idea for Joe, besides trying to set up his X with Gay, might be to try to set it up with Fei in the same spot. Here he threatens Fix for 26 from the F. Now that's not as high scoring as the Fix he threatened after Gay, but it's a little bit harder for Jerry to block because now Ta is out of the question with AF not being a valid 2-letter word. However, the problem for Joe is this play of Fix simply doesn't score enough, and Jerry can just ignore it. Jerry doesn't even play in the top right corner of the board, he just drops his S with Aufs and Saw for 17. And Joe here does not want to play Fix immediately because that would give Jerry a spot for Chi, so first he would respond with Mig for 8, saving Fix for his next turn. Jerry again doesn't block. Trying to block with Fa would actually end in disaster because that would give Joe Fax and XI for over 40 points. So Jerry just ignores that, playing Ka and Agin for 11. And Joe goes out with Fix for 26, but he falls just short. After getting 20 bonus points, Joe loses by 1, 397 to 398. So Fei not quite going to work either. The last potential setup for Joe to consider in that part of the board would be If for 7 making TI. The idea here, threatening Fei and X on his next turn. But again, the problem is this just doesn't score enough, and Jerry can once again safely ignore it. He sticks to his plan of Aufs and Saw for 17, Joe gets his play of X for 27, but now Jerry once again responds with Ka and Agin, and after Joe plays out with Mig, Joe is going to once again fall just short, this time losing by 2, 396 to 398. So none of Joe's setups seem to work in response to Jerry's play of Cell. So does that mean that Cell is a winning play for Jerry? Not necessarily, because Joe does not have to go the route of setting up his X. You might remember a little while ago in this video, I showed a line where Joe didn't set up his X and he played off one tile at a time. In that line, Joe fell a little bit short, losing by 5. That line occurred in the variation where Jerry doesn't play Cell but plays Aufs and Saw first, as he did during the game. Now, keep that number of 5 that Joe lost by in that line in mind as I show you a similar variation here. Instead of trying to set up his X, Joe drops it immediately, getting 9 points with X. Jerry responds with Aufs and Saw for 17, and Joe responds with Mig for 8, getting rid of his G. Jerry now plays Ta and Anu for 9. Again, as I mentioned in the earlier line, he cannot play Ka and Agin for 11, getting 2 more points, because that gives Joe a high-scoring play of Kaf and Fear with his F for 17. This is super important, and this is why it's very important for Joe to get his move order correct. He has to wait to play his F until after Jerry gets rid of his A. If Joe had played his F instead of his G on the last turn when he played Mig, then he would actually lose, because Jerry would then have the freedom to play off his A for 2 more points, getting 11 instead of 9, because then he wouldn't have to worry about Joe getting the high-scoring F play. And as we'll see, those 2 points make a difference. So again, move order critical for Joe. He's got to play his G before his F. Assuming Joe executes this correctly, then Jerry can't play Ka and again for 11. He instead has to sacrifice 2, playing Ta and Anu for 9. And now, and only now that Jerry doesn't have an A, does Joe get rid of his F, playing Fem for 8 points. Jerry, of course, has to pass, and now we see the idea of Fem. As we saw in the earlier variation, he sets up Fem and L for 13 points. Jerry passes again, and now Joe goes out with Li for 4, and this game will end in a tie, 396 to 396. Now, I mentioned before, keep in mind the number 5, because we looked at the exact same line earlier in the variation where Jerry doesn't play Cell, where he just drops his S with Aufs and Saw. The only difference between these two lines was that in the earlier line, Jerry didn't play his C with Cell for 5. He ended up playing it with Mick for 10. What's the difference between 5 and 10? That's 5 points. So this sequence is 5 points worse for Jerry, and that jibes with the fact that Jerry won by 5 in the earlier line, but now Jerry and Joe tied. So here, Joe can get away with playing one tile at a time, because the difference is Jerry has now already squandered 5 points by playing Cell instead of Mick. So the idea is that Jerry has to play Cell, because otherwise Joe gets a big X setup and wins, but by doing so, he allows Joe to achieve a tie by playing off one tile at a time. Counterintuitively, Joe's only win if Jerry doesn't block is to make the X setup, but once Jerry blocks his initial X setup, Joe can no longer win by making an X setup. As we saw, all of Joe's X setups in the top right corner after Cell will fall narrowly. Joe's only way to not lose is to then revert back to the initially losing strategy of playing one tile at a time. In that case, he achieves a tie. The engine Macondo confirms that in the position after Jerry plays Cell, right here, there is nothing more for Joe to do than play off one tile at a time and tie in the variation I just showed you. And Macondo also confirms that Jerry's best play is indeed Cell in this position after Joe plays Is. So, does that mean that this endgame is a theoretical tie? Well, maybe. We know it's a theoretical tie starting from the position where it's Jerry to move after Joe drops his S with Is for 2 points. In this position, Jerry has to play Cell for 5 to block Joe's X setup we talked about earlier. If he plays this, Joe has to not try to set up his X again. He has to play off one tile at a time, and if both players get it right, the game will end in a tie. However, this assumes that Tis and Is, if we go back a couple more turns, were indeed optimal by both these players. Tis is indeed optimal for Jerry here for 31 in the original position. However, Joe here should actually not play Is for 2. This came as a big surprise to both myself and Joe as we were corresponding analyzing this position together. Macondo shows that instead of playing Is for 2, Joe should actually completely ignore Jerry's setup of Za and immediately go for his setup of A, E, and E, allowing Jerry to get 33 points for his A. So how is this going to play out? If Joe ignores Jerry's setup and goes straight for his own, then Jerry has no better option than to cash in for 33. It's worth mentioning if Jerry tries to delay this and play Aufs and Saw to stop Joe from playing his own S in that spot, then Joe can now and only now respond with Is for 2, blocking Jerry from playing Za. And that actually results in a transposition of the sequence that happened during the real game. And as I showed you guys earlier, Joe ended up winning in that line by 4 points. So this will not work for Jerry. He has nothing better to do than cash in for 33 while he can. And Jerry takes a large lead here. He's up by 59 points. But here, Joe has a winning play, and he has to get it right. He must immediately play Aufs and Saw for 17. He, of course, can't play Fix, because that gives Jerry a spot for Chi. And he also can't play off his G immediately because that allows Jerry to get the 17 points for Aufs and Saw. So Joe has to play his S first, because not only does this score as many points as Joe can for the S, it also deprives Jerry of the opportunity to get those 17 points for his own S. So Joe absolutely must make this play on this turn. Jerry now is best served playing off his C with Mick for 10. And now once again, Joe needs to be patient. He, of course, still can't play fix because that gives Jerry chi. So Joe has to now play off his G. Mig for 8 points comes down. And here is the difference. Jerry now is not getting 17 for his S with Alfs. He's only getting 11 with either Migs and S or Mix. It doesn't actually matter. Jerry plays for 11, and now, and only now, Joe goes out with Fix for 38. He gets 20 bonus points, and Joe wins this game by 3, 422 to 419. So how do we explain this? How was Joe able to win in a line where he allowed Jerry to get his 33-point play, but he was only able to tie in the line where he blocked it? Well, the thing here, guys, is basically every other trade-off went in Joe's favor. Yes, Jerry got a lot more points for his A than he did in the tying line. But remember, Jerry got a lot less points for his S. He only got 11 here, whereas he got 17 in the tying line playing Alfs and Saw. Also, Joe got a lot more for his own S. Joe only got 2 when he played Is, but now Joe gets 17 for Alfs and Saw. That is a 15-point difference right there. And also, Joe gets his setup down. In the tying line, Jerry was able to block it with Cell. But here, Joe is able to get it down, and that gets him a lot more points for his X than he would in the line where he plays off one tile at a time. So while Jerry does get a lot more for his A, Joe gets a lot more for his S, Jerry gets a lot less for his own S, and Joe gets a lot more for his X. And these trade-offs are enough to overcome letting Jerry have his 33-point play. So that's why, guys, in these super complex positions, you don't necessarily want to always trust your instinct. Your natural instinct is, of course, to block Za if you're Joe following Jerry's play of Tiz. Joe certainly felt that way. I certainly felt that way when I first looked at the position. But when you dive deeper, you see that Joe can only achieve a tie in that line. A more thorough analysis and review of the math shows that Joe is actually better served letting Jerry have his 33 points. So, like I said there, guys, the biggest lesson, always make sure you do the math, do the thorough analysis in these positions, because you never know how the numbers are going to shake out. In any case, guys, that is all I have for you in this position. Really cool stuff. Major shout out to Joe and Jerry for playing this game and sending it to me. Really appreciate it, and hope you guys learned something and enjoyed this video. Thanks so much for watching. Really appreciate all your support as always. I will see you soon for the next one. Have a great day. Bye-bye.